Hello and welcome from snowy Edmonton, Alberta. My name is Darlene with Digital Photo Mentor, and this is my weekly YouTube live stream. If you're joining in for the first time, I help beginning and intermediate photographers to improve their photography from capturing the camera all the way through to the final editing process. And what we're going to do today is edit some viewer and follower subscriber images. Okay, so regulars join in. I know we probably have a few regulars here, and we're eager to get started. Apparently, my tongue doesn't work. I need some more coffee. So grab your coffee and your computer, and we'll dig in. Okay. So for the purposes of today, I'm going to probably start mostly in Lightroom, but I know that a few of our users, a few of our subscribers and people here use Luminar, and the much anticipated Luminar Neo is coming soon. I cannot an exact date yet, but it's coming. So hang tight. So we've got a lot of regulars, and I have some of your images. And hello. We have snow in Edmonton. How is Vancouver holding up there? New Jersey. So we got both coasts covered. Hey, Holly. And from Ireland. So we got two Anns. And across the pond, across the big pond, is Trish down in New Zealand. Awesome. Not so sunny. Well, we've got about a foot of snow, Trish. So you're probably better off than Canada today. Deb up in Alaska. So we've got east, west, north, south covered. Sweden. Hello, Bjorn. Welcome. Elsie, are you new to the channel, Elsie? Where are you joining us from? Great to have you with us. All right. So keep mentioning in the chat where you're from, and if you have any questions, do put them in the chat. My husband Rob is in there, and he'll be providing links to things that I mentioned along the way. Vivian in St. Louis. Good to see everybody. Yes, Anne and Trish know each other. So we were all in India together. So let's get started. AJ, I have some of your pictures as well, AJ. Good to have you. Funny story, AJ. We've been watching Chicago Fire, so we're all over the Chicago stories. We've been watching Chicago Fire, Chicago PD, the whole thing, and I've been watching ER from the beginning again. Good show. So I'm going to start with one of Holly's. As I mentioned, I've got AJ's. I've got a couple of AJ's. This is a really cool image that you sent in a while back. I like that one. This one is a brand new one, also very cool. One of Stephanie's image, if she's here. I've got Rita, and we're going to start with. Let's start with this one, right? So my workflow is generally I start in Lightroom, and then I proceed to use Luminar often as a finishing or as the plug-in version of Luminar AI currently, and I'll be using Luminar Neo. I can actually probably show you a few things in Neo today if we find something that's applicable, but I want to start with the sort of process that I go through, and this applies to whether you're using Lightroom or Luminar or something else. I usually go and choose the camera profile first. Okay, in Lightroom, you can follow my little cursor here with the little green circle around it. In Lightroom, make sure you're using Lightroom Classic. This has come up a few times actually by email. So if you're not sure what version you're using, it actually should say up here, and you can go up to about, and it will tell you whether you're using Classic or CC, because there is a difference between the two. So I am demonstrating Lightroom Classic. Okay, so if you're not sure, that's where you find it, and you can see up in my top menu bar it says Classic as well. Take a sip of my coffee. I see a couple of thumbs up already. Thank you for that. Do please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Especially if you're new here, and you'll get notices of when new videos come out and when I am live. So the first thing I'm going to look at is, are any of these it's not hovering over. Usually it changes when I hover, but it's not doing that. Are any of these camera profiles better than, excuse me, the standard one that she had chosen? And in this case, I don't think so. I like the standard one. It's got nice, clean colors. I look at the histogram next. Now she's got a great exposure here. It's bang on. This is a Canon raw file. So we've got lots of raw data and material to work with. Okay. So I'm going to do my usual trick. And if you've been watching for a while, I'm going to hold shift and double click on the word white. Okay. So what that does is it sets the end point. Okay. It's called the end point. So it moved the graph over from the edge here where it was to touching the side of the graph. What that means is there was no pure white before. Right, I'm just going to undo that step. Okay, now watch the graph up here, the histogram. When I double click that, see how it just moved it all over a little bit to, I'm going to go the other opposite way. Wait, which is this way. My video is inverted, so I got to think about it. It moved everything that way, okay? And it's now touching the edge of the graph. If I hold down the Alt key and click the slider, it'll show me anything that's clipping, and it's just this tiny little highlight over here on the right. Okay, so I might pull it down a little bit, but otherwise it's just given the image a little bit of brightness, okay, without touching the exposure slider. And then I'm going to do the same thing to black. So I'm holding shift, double clicking, and now it's set the black endpoint, and I can check with my Alt Option key. Okay, so you can see that immediately just by doing those two things, it's punched up the contrast. And what did you notice about the color? Okay, does anybody notice anything that has changed in terms of the intensity of the color? Okay, yes, it's recording, Holly. It always records, and it goes to the YouTube channel immediately after. Okay, so yes, you'll be able to rewatch all of this and then try and replicate it later. Okay, I don't think the shift double click thing works in Luminar AI. Not sure if they're implementing that in Luminar Neo, but you can definitely still use the Alt Option trick. And if that also, I think, doesn't work in, oops, where did I go? I lost you. If this doesn't work in Neo or in Luminar AI, just hit the J key and it will show you any clipping. So in this case, when I go too far, you can see that the whites are clipping, and I come down just enough so that there isn't any areas that show that clipping. And with black, okay, if I want to have a little more black, okay, now you can see that it's darkened up the background quite considerably and added a lot of contrast. In this case, I may not want to have that much contrast because it's a flower and I want to keep it a little bit softer. So I'm just going to bring the shadows up a little bit. Okay, now if you don't have a vision for what you want to do with your image, just start playing around with things. Okay, so there's Lightroom presets that you could try, or if you are in Luminar, then there's templates or presets as well. So yes, the colors definitely got more vibrant when I added the blacks. Okay, so that's a great notice of, I rarely use the saturation slider. Okay, so if you want more saturation in your colors, make sure that you have plenty of blacks. Okay, so even just watch as I slide this. Okay, so less black, the colors look more pastel. Can you see that? More black, the colors go really, really intense. Okay, so I think I would leave it somewhere in here. Now the white balance is really good as well. I don't need to adjust anything there, right? So I don't have a particular vision for this image. I'm going to use one of my presets to darken the edge a little bit. We could also go the opposite way and actually lighten the edge and make it more pastel, okay? So you kind of have to decide which direction you want to go. And I'm going to take this one over into Luminar now and play with some of the presets, which are called templates in Luminar AI. I believe they're going back to calling them, presets again. So if you were using Luminar 4, they were called presets. Luminar AI, they were called templates. And I believe they're going back to using the word presets again, just to confuse us. These photo editing companies that make these softwares, I really wish they would get, I have an update to install. I will do that later, okay? So here's a good reminder that if you have updates to software, do update it, but make sure you back up your catalog before you do any updates, especially to Lightroom. Okay. So if there is an update, go ahead and install it, but make sure you're backed up first. So once we get into Luminar AI, this is still Luminar AI. It gives you some options. We're in the template module, if you will, and it gives you some suggestions of which templates might work. So you'll notice that it recognized that I'm doing something nature, even in the macro realm, and I can just click through these and see if there's one that kind of works well with this image. So I'm not crazy about these so far. I'm kind of looking for something a little more softer and artistic. Well, that's interesting. Right? That's kind of nice. So far I like the nostalgic haze. That one's not too bad. So far we like that one. I'm going to stay with that one. And I might play with some of my own templates. Now it knows that I've got macro. There's none here that are sort of soft. I'm looking for something softer. And yeah, not recommending. So this one you would have to go purchase. Okay, so it gives you 3. I'm going to go with this one because it's a little bit softer colors, and we'll start there. Okay. Once you choose the template to apply it, you can dial it down using this slider at the bottom. So it'll literally just lower the overall effect of that template. Okay. Or you can go tool by tool, and it shows you which ones have been applied with this little dot next to them. Okay, so you can see that something has been applied in the color realm. You can see it's shifted some of the hues a little bit, and it's lowered the saturation of the yellows. Okay, so I can decide if I like those adjustments or if I want to play with it a bit more. Now, if I want to bring that orange flower up, I might decide, okay, I want a little bit more orange, and maybe I want to minimize the pink flower. So I'm going to dial the saturation down. You can see that that's affecting the pink flower. There's probably some other colors involved in there as well. Okay. Probably red, actually. Yep. Notice that red is in the orange flower and in the pink flower. Okay, so you have to be careful when you're using these sliders that it doesn't go too far on overall, and you can also mask it out. Okay, so if I don't want this to apply to the orange flower, I can mask it out. Okay, I'm liking the overall softness here. Okay, so see how there's partly orange and partly yellow and partly red inside there. Okay, so I don't mind turning the red down a little bit. My mouse battery's low. Thank you very much for telling me. All right, so let's just see what the color one is doing. You can toggle it off and on. So it's subtle. It's just shifting the colors a little bit. Okay, let's see what else has been applied. There's been a film grain applied here. Okay, so I can take that farther. One of the things that I recommend doing, especially when you're playing with software or templates for the first time, is take things to the extreme, right? So we can increase the grain, we can increase all of this just to see what it does and decide, okay, which of these things do I want to adjust? Okay, we can lower the softness of it, right? But take it to extreme so that you see what this tool does and then decide where you want to be. I do think the film grain adds sort of a nice little softening to this image. Okay. Mood has been applied. So this is a LUT, or a lookup table, which is kind of like a cinematic grading, right? And you can see that that's what's applying this soft color tone. Okay. Nostalgic haze is the template that it's used. Okay. So if I dial this down, you can see what it's doing. Okay. Now I can also mask any of these things. Okay, so if I want this to apply really strongly on the other flowers, but not so much on the orange one, I can erase it a little bit from the orange one. Okay, so I'm going to erase, make my brush larger. I'm using the square bracket keys to make it a little bit larger. Okay, so I'm just erasing it from here, but only at 50%, so it's going to be soft. Okay. You can see that's the mask. So to see the mask, I'm pressing the / key on my keyboard. Now let's see what this one is doing. So that's before and after, right? And I can mask it even more if I want. Take the saturation down. Right, now you can see that the orange flower has got more color than the rest of the image. Okay, so one thing that I try and keep in mind is always edit for the subject. Okay, so the reason that I am masking this flower is because I want to have more attention on this one than the pink ones. Okay, so I'm having more color in this one and contrast than in the others. Okay, can you see how now the orange one is coming out more than the background ones? Okay, like so. All right. And sometimes there's a dance. I might want to come back here and bring the orange down a little bit because I went too far once I took that other one off. Right, like so. Well, let's see what else it's applied. Okay, now it's applied some portrait tools, and I don't have a person in here, so I'm just going to turn them off. And my cat is walking across the desk. There she is. Bye, Munch. Let's see what else I might apply. The other one that's a favorite of mine is Mystical. Okay, I like to put this one on landscapes, and on this one I want to soften, so it's going to work really well. Okay, so dial this one all the way up. Look what that does. So now it gives this beautiful sort of hazy look. Okay. And again, if I want it not on the flower, well, guess what? We've already painted this. Sorry, now I've got cat hair on my face. We've already painted the mask in here. Right? I'm actually going to just put a little bit back on the flower here so it's not quite so vibrant. Okay, so I've already got a mask that I like. So I can copy this mask and then go down into Mystical. And when I paste it, it's going to remove some of that filter or that effect off of this flower. Okay, so you can see now I have the same mask. So this is a really great way to reuse the same mask and not have to paint again and again. Okay. So I like what Mystical is doing. I might also try Glow if I want to take it a little farther. And there's several tools in this Glow panel. Soft Focus sort of is an overall. Glow applies to only the brightest areas of the picture. So watch which parts are actually glowing. It's the center of the orange flower and the pink flower below. Okay, so it's only glowing on the highlights. Orton effect is one that I use a lot on people. It tends to add a lot of contrast, so I usually dial that down, and it also brightens the image up. So I find that I need to dial those down a bit. Okay. You can also increase the softness if you want it to be softer yet. Okay, so Orton effect is another one. And finally, even softer. Okay, now that's kind of pretty. Okay, so it's softened. Let's maybe give it a bit more contrast. Okay, let's see what that's doing. Okay, so it's giving it a sort of like a hazy effect overall. I kind of like this first one actually. And I'm going to keep the contrast low and turn it down a little bit. Right, so there is no right or wrong. And you can see it's kind of giving this flower an overall glow. If I don't want as much on these ones, again, I can mask. Okay, so I've got that same mask. It's applying paste. There we go. So now it's got the same thing. So it's affecting more the background. Okay, so you can see I'm glowing these background flowers more than the main flower. Let's just do, I did like this one. All right, let's go with this one. Okay, so see how much I can change the look of the effect just by adjusting the sliders. Let's see how everybody's doing here. I'm going to come back if there are any questions. That's funny, Holly. The cat has come to change the batteries of the mouse or eat the mouse. Hey, Stephanie. Okay, this is a good question, Trish. So a template in Luminar is a multiple different tools being applied to your image at the same time. Okay, a LUT is one tool that applies just color grading. That's it. Okay, so a LUT is in your Luminar AI, it's in the mood tool. Okay. So it doesn't say LUT. It used to, when you were using Luminar 4, it would say LUT, L-U-T, right? But mood tool is your LUT. Okay. So the item that you've applied here, or the one that you've chosen here, that's a LUT. You can see that all it does is affects color. Okay. So I can go through here and pick a different one if I want. Okay. So if we want to go contrasty, okay, I had a vision of having this one be a little softer. Okay, so we could play with cross processing and so on. Okay, so this one, a LUT is only color versus a template applies multiple tools at the same time. Okay, does that help answer that question, Trish? Do we have any other questions that I missed, Rob? Yes, that was a great tour, wasn't it, Trish? Ah, okay, you guys were on a separate trips, right? So many Trishes. We had another Trish that was with us in 2018 as well. And Dave. So switching the LUT, does it get rid of the template? Great questions, everybody. No, it doesn't get rid of the template. Okay, so you'll notice that if I switch the LUT, I'm just going to pick a different one. Okay, it still has the name of the template that applied down here. Okay, but what it's done is it's edited it. Okay, so if I want, I can save this as a new one. Okay, so anytime you make adjustments after applying a template, okay, you can go and resave it. So even with the same LUT applied, I've made some other edits to color and contrast, and I could save this as a new template. Okay, keep in mind that because I've done some masking though, if I save this as a template, okay, it's going to have the masks as well. So anything else that I apply this to will have the same mask, but you can go and edit it at any time. Okay. I think I want to do a vignette on here. Okay, so my trick for vignettes is make it dark and then lower the feather so that you can adjust the positioning. Okay, so I want to darken these bottom flowers and keep this guy. Now I have a cat meowing outside my door. Keep this orange flower in focus. Okay, the focus attention. So now I'm lowering the brightness on the edges to keep attention on this flower, or we could go the opposite way and go with a light vignette. Okay, so plus makes a white vignette, minus makes a dark one. Okay, let's see how we're doing in a before and after here. Okay, so this is what we brought from Lightroom, right? Really colorful, punchy image, and now this is what we have here. Okay, so very soft. Okay. One other thing I can add in terms of if you want to do color grading or toning. So there's many different ways to affect color in Luminar. Okay, so we've looked at the color sliders in the HSL. You can adjust the temperature and tint sliders just like we did in Lightroom, right? Yellow, blue, green, magenta, and that's under the light panel. You can go and play with the LUT under mood. You can go under toning, okay? And toning allows you to adjust the tint or color of the highlights versus the shadows. Okay, now I'm actually going to shift this to something blue because I want to make this background less sort of gray. So I'm going to go with blue. So see how it's affecting the background because it's a dark. Okay, so I'm using shadows. Okay, dial it down a little bit because the background looks kind of brown. So I'm just want to give it a little bit of tint. Okay, but you'll notice that I could shift it to any color here. I just want to have a little bit of blue in it. Okay, like that. Okay. And we can actually make the highlights a different color. So I'm going to give them a little bit of yellow. Okay. Okay. Then we can decide, okay, do we want balance towards the highlights or balance towards the shadows? I'm going to shift ever so slightly. So see what this is doing. Off, on. Okay, so it's just getting rid of that sort of green tint in the background. Like so. I'm pretty happy with that. The only other thing I might do is do a little bit of dodging and burning here. When you dodge and burn, that's selectively lightening and darkening. These are old terms from the darkroom. Make sure that you have the strength down really low, like to 10. Okay. And I'm just going to paint on this flower a little bit. And you see wherever I paint, it's darkening. Well, that was weird. Okay. So see how it's just darkening those petals? Also watch the edge of your image. Okay. So you want to make sure you don't have light bits on the edge. I'm just doing some tone control separately of a vignette, okay? And I might even do this petal up here. Okay? So I'll turn it off so you can see what I've done. Watch that bottom flower. Okay, so just tone control. So before, lots of color everywhere. Now we've really focused on this orange flower, okay? I might even crop this a little bit, but let's bring it back into Lightroom and see how it looks there. Okay, Holly, so there's your homework is you can rewatch this, see what I did, and see if you can replicate something similar or keep playing with it. You know, you might even want to do more of a brown tone and old-fashioned, or bring the saturation down even more on the other colors. But I do think that bringing the pink flower down focuses more on that orange one, right? But it's a really cool picture. So let's see if we crop this a little bit. One thing to think about when you're photographing flowers, especially, is they don't have to be, your camera doesn't have to be square, okay? Your camera doesn't have to be level. You can actually shoot things at a tilt because this is straight across and this is almost straight up and down. Okay, so keep in mind that diagonal lines provide more interest. I'm not going to crop this one this way because I'm losing the tips of the flowers. But if you had shot it back a little bit with a little bit more tilt to the camera, right, you want to make sure you keep the space. But just watch the stems, okay, because the stem will lead you to the flower, okay? Now, guess what I'm going to do next? Because one of my common things is to flip the picture, remember? So we're going to flip it this way because now your eye comes in from left to right. So your eye comes in this petal and hangs out here, and your eye comes up here. Okay, so your leading lines want to lead from the left. Okay, so lead from the left in like that. Okay. So just an idea in terms of when you're shooting. So I wouldn't crop this one as tight because we lose the leaves of the petals, and I don't want to do that. But I'm just going to come up a bit from the bottom because there's a lot of sort of busyness down here, and I'm just going to come up to there. I don't want to lose any of these petals, but ideally I'd love to be able to crop out that thing, right? Maybe I will, like so. Because this thing on the edge again. So just watch the edges of your pictures, okay? Like that. Now we have a little more emphasis on the orange flower. I'm going to add one more graduated filter here in Lightroom. So you notice how I did Lightroom, Luminar, and now I'm back to Lightroom again. Okay, so I'm just darkening this bottom even more. Okay, because I really want the emphasis away from this pink flower. See that? So let's compare to the other one, which we brought from Lightroom. So that was our Lightroom edit from the original. And that's what I've got now. Okay. Awesome. Okay, I think I answered Trisha's question. All right, so let's move on to another image. Before I do, I just want to mention a couple of things that we have coming up. I'm going to bring this here over on the screen. Rob, if you could please share a link to this. On Thursday the 10th coming up, we have Photoshop 101. So this is for you if you are new to Photoshop, if you are new to photo editing, if you have the Adobe monthly package and you have Lightroom and Photoshop, but you never use Photoshop, I'm going to cover all the basis of getting started, right from setting up your settings in Photoshop, understanding the menus and the tools and what they do. And this is the first of 3, right? So there's going to be 3 of these classes. Photoshop 201 and 301 will come later on in February and March. Okay? So Rob has shared a link to that one. So you could sign up here. The early bird pricing on this one is $14.97 until the 8th. Okay, so you've got 3 days to sign up and then get 50% off this one. Okay. What else do we have coming up, Rob? Oh yes, Luminar Neo. We have our Luminar Neo course that will be available soon. Again, I can't release any information on that until the embargo is lifted for those of us who are partners. But we have our course on pre-sale or a wait list right now. We will open it up shortly as soon as I have some dates and we're able to set the dates in the calendar. But you can sign up here, right? And to get on the wait list, and you'll get notified of when this course is available. Okay. So it doesn't mean you're obligated to purchase it. It just means that we will let you know when it's available and the dates. And yes, it will be recorded as well as the Photoshop one, and you will have access to those for a lifetime afterwards. Okay. The Neo one's going to be fairly extensive. It's probably going to be 6, maybe 8 classes that are 2 hours long. So it will be probably in the neighborhood of 12 hours plus worth of training. And I'm going to go through every possible module and tool inside of Luminar Neo and talk about everything you need to know to use it as a standalone and as a plugin. Okay, so if you are using Rob, if you could please share a link to that. Arlene, there's a link to the Luminar course right above you. Rob shared the link there. Just click on that and it will take you to this page, or the Photoshop one is just above. So, sorry, Anne. Any photography trips being planned? Not at this time, Anne. Unfortunately, just we're still too tentative in regards to the world opening up again. We can't plan things because things change weekly, right? So we are going to be working on a workshop in Alberta. So for those of you that are more local, we are going to be working on a night photography workshop at a horse ranch, and we'll have access to photographing all kinds of cool Indigenous artifacts, lodge, and of course the horses. You can't access the link. Here, try this one. Try that one, Anne or Arlene. It should post right below you, Arlene. You're on Facebook. I don't know if I have your email, but it should post right below your comment on Facebook, Arlene. Regional tours, and yes, possibly. So like I said, the Alberta one is what we're working on for probably fall, right? So you're certainly welcome to come and hang out at the horse ranch. All right, so I know we've got AJ here. I want to move on and get to another image. And Stephanie, was Stephanie here? Do I have one of Trisha's still? Well, I've got a couple of AJs, and your images were really cool. This one that came in a while back when we were looking for water images, and this one came in over the last week. So I want to take a look at this one actually. So this is more of a fall image. We're deep in the heart of winter, and this is definitely something we will see here in around September. So where are you based, AJ? I forget where you are at there. Toronto? Oh, Chicago, right. Chicago. Yes, I remember. Okay, so we're going to do the same process again. We're going to look at the camera profiles, and this is a Nikon file. Okay, so we could see that was taken with a Nikon. Okay. Usually for images like this, I like the landscape profile because it tends to give a bit more color. I usually don't choose vivid because as you can see, when I add the blacks, the colors get really rich anyways, right? So I'm going to do the shift double click on here real quick. And now you see what happened? It went minus 100. Okay, so that was actually really cool to bring out the sky, right? But it's flattened the image out. Okay, so be careful when you're doing these kinds of global edits. Okay, so global mean it applies to the whole image. Okay, it's now sort of flattened all the highlights out here as well. So I'm going to leave this up at the top, even though we got a bit of clipping in the sky. We're going to solve that another way. Okay. I'm going to warm it up a little bit as well, so I get a little more orange in these leaves here. One thing I find is this is kind of going back to my days of color correcting in the dark room, is when an image looks cool. Okay, so if I just kind of undo both of these here, when an image feels cool, like when I'm looking at this tree bark, it looks a little blue and I feel like the orange could punch a little more here. Okay, it's usually a combination of both of these sliders and they need to go the opposite direction. Okay, so when something is cool, it usually means that there's blue and magenta in it. Okay, so I'm going to add a little bit of yellow and then I'm going to take away a little bit of the magenta. Okay, I'll just see the difference. Mostly that's because we've added this black in here. Okay, I'm going to punch up the shadows a little bit. So again, one of the questions I get is, how do I avoid over processing? Okay, so I'm going to show you over processing real quick here and show you what that looks like. Okay, so that's over processing. Okay, so when you've gone too far, you can see we got lots of detail in the sky and everything, but there's really sort of, we've lost that depth of tone. Okay, so everything is such a similar color now. There's no highlights and shadows. Okay, so you want to sort of keep both of those things in your image, because otherwise it will start to look really flat. Okay, I am going to bring the shadows up and the exposure up a little bit. And then we're going to play with the sky. Okay, so let's do a mask on the sky and see how well it selects the sky. Looks like it did a pretty good job. Okay, I'm going to bring the highlights down, bring the exposure down. Yeah, you can see it didn't get all of the sky. It missed this area here. Okay, so let's see if we can pick up that area. So I'm going to add to this mask a color range, and I'm just going to choose a really small range. And let's see if it's done. Okay, so it's chosen, looks like it's chosen the whole tree as well. Here, let me change this to green. Yeah, it's chosen the tree as well. So let me just adjust that. Okay, so you can say on the color range slider, choose more of that color or less of that color. So I'm just going until I get the tree not selected. Okay. Let's go back here. Now I've got more of the whole sky. Okay. So now you can see it's affecting all the sky bits. Okay. So the sky mask didn't quite get all of the parts that I wanted. I had to go and add the color range. Okay. So see our before and after. Now we've picked up the sky without adjusting that master slider here and lowering the highlights. Okay, so I want to keep the highlights, keep the shadows. I'm going to give it a bit of clarity. Okay. And an edge vignette. So now we've got something pretty cool. We've got detail in the sky. That tree is really coming out in this area here. The leaves, I don't know if this is a vine growing up this tree or what, but it's really cool, actually. Let's give it even a bit more warmth. Right. Now, if we want those colors to come out in the leaves more, head down to the HSL panel. And we're going to use the targeted adjustment tool here. That's this little circle. Okay, so click on it. And then when I select an area on the image, watch what happens when I click and hold. Okay, so it's affecting the red and orange sliders. So anything that is that tone in this image is affected. Okay, so I'm going to increase the red and the orange saturation. Okay, so I get more of those leaves. We could also shift the color. Okay, so we're using the hue slider and give it more orange as opposed to pink. Okay, so I'm just going to shift it ever so slightly to the positive side, like so. And that looks pretty good. All right. Could I subtract the tree as the subject? Well, let's try that. Let's see what happens if I choose a new mask and just select the subject. Let's see what it chooses. Yeah, it did a pretty good job, but you'll see that it also missed this area of the tree. right? So I still, even if I had done subtract the subject from this other mask, right, it would have missed this part here. So if I want to apply something to the tree, I need to add a bit down here. So I'm just going to use a radial gradient. So now I've got the whole tree selected. Actually, I want to select this. See, it's missed this leaf too. So now we've got the whole tree, okay? And let's say I'm going to add some texture. I want to increase the whites. Okay, so whites, see how the white increases the contrast? And the blacks. And let's warm it up a little bit. Okay, see what this one is doing. Where's my eyeball? So that's what our masks are doing, affecting the sky. Great idea. Yep. Great idea, Anne. Okay, so always see what Lightroom will select as your subject. Okay. And remember, use the upside down trick. Okay. Let's look at the before image. Okay. So when you look at the image upside down, your eye will be drawn naturally to the areas that will take your attention, even when the image is right side up. Okay. So right now it's the sky, right? So when we put the edits on, we've still got the sky kind of taking a lot of attention. Okay. So let's see if we can fix that. I'm going to go back into HSL here and play with luminance. And let's just see what happens if I choose this color. Okay, so I can see how I can lower the yellows and just darken that area a little bit. And I will also take the saturation down in the yellow as well. Okay, so now it's kind of minimized that sky area and leaving our attention on the tree. Okay. Great suggestion. Oh, Arlene, you got it. Awesome. Okay. Let's see. Any questions about that one? Do we like that edit? It's a really cool image. Nice perspective. Looking up. Cool shot, AJ. Okay, Stephanie. This is a cool picture as well. Let's see what kind of file this is. So we've got a Canon file. F11, right? So trying to get a little bit of depth of field on this little frozen branch. So definitely looks like something. Yes, you did take that, AJ. So now your job is to go and replicate that, right? So if you're going to photograph something like this, definitely the F11 was the right way to go. Good job on that, Stephanie. But you want to be careful of where you focus, because when we zoom in here, right, you can see that these icicles are fairly sharp, okay? But this front one here is not. It looks like this middle one is nice and sharp, okay? You want to keep the thing that's the biggest usually and the closest to the camera sharp. So I would have focused a little more to the front, because it looks like this back one, these ones are more in focus back here, right? So I would have put the focus a little more towards the front, okay? That's a great point, Holly. You all are great photographers, right? You just need to practice your editing to make them stand out and go, wow. But you have to have a good shot to begin with, right? So you have to have a good eye. And I see many of you, like all the images I'm working on right now, are great images to begin with. You can take them to the next level by having some great editing. EXIF. Okay, so AJ wants to know, what is EXIF? So EXIF is the data that comes with your file. Okay, so if I go back into the develop panel here, okay, under metadata, you'll see that it says EXIF and IPTC. I forget what that stands for, but EXIF is this information. Okay, so it shows me the size of the file, the date it was shot, the exposure information, the lens, the ISO, did the flash fire, and so on. Okay, you can also add to your metadata. For example, you can add your copyright information. Okay, so down here, right, I could say copyright, and I could put in Stephanie. Sorry, I'm not sure if I'm spelling your name right. Okay. Okay, so you could put that in, rights reserved. So these are things that I have set as a preset, yeah, it's a preset in my Lightroom, right? So I will apply that when I import my images and have my copyright applied, right? So that is definitely something that you can set up to happen to all your images. That's meta. Does that answer your question? What is the EXIF of the photo? I'm not sure I understand the question. This is the EXIF, EJ. This is the EXIF data. Okay. Oh, you want to know the settings? Ah, okay. Sorry. Okay, so she shot this at ISO 100 at 80th of a second, f11. Sorry. Does that help? Well, I guess I answered that question for somebody else that doesn't isn't familiar with that one. I think I got your question now, right? So back to the same process again. Okay, now notice that it doesn't have camera profiles. Okay, that's interesting because what camera was this? Ah, Canon EOS RP. So it means that I haven't got the Canon RP profiles installed. Okay, so I can use the Adobe ones, or I could go and find those profiles. Okay, let me just see ACR profiles, Canon RP. So if you don't have the profiles like what is happening here, and I know this has occurred to for a few different people. Let me just find this. Okay, so if you don't have them, just do a search for ACR, which is Adobe Camera Raw, and the name of your camera. Okay, and you should be able to find the profiles here. Usually on the Adobe site. Okay, so let's see if it RP, was it RP? I'm just going to do a search for RP. Yeah, so it came out in December. So it is available. Okay, so I probably just need to update my camera raw and then it would be there. Okay, so if you're working in any Adobe products and you don't see your camera, just search to see if the ACR matches for your camera, if it's been released, if it's supported. And if it is, you probably just need to update your program. So question about F11 should give depth of field, good depth of field. So it has to do with distance to subject, AJ, because the closer you get to the subject, the less depth of field you get, even at F11, right? Rob, if you want to share my Ultimate Macro article, I explain a bit about that in there. When you're doing things that are real close up, you may actually need to either do focus stacking, right? Or use a smaller aperture even than that. Good question. Great questions today. All right, I'm just going to look and see if there's any other color here that might work. Adobe Landscape does give it a bit more punch, so I'm going to go with that one under the profiles. I'm going to do my shift double click on both the whites and the blacks. Okay, now look what happened. All I did was a color profile and 2 shift double clicks, and look how much more punch this image has. Okay. One thing in terms of framing as well, Stephanie, is make sure you keep things, give it a little bit of space. You've got almost no space below this little icicle here, right? It's like when you're photographing a person, okay? So if I'm turning this way, for example, I don't want to sit here in the frame looking this way. You want space in front of the person, okay? Likewise, with an object, you want space. We know it's dripping down, right? So it needs to have space underneath, right? Because it feels like the drip's going to leave the frame. Okay? So if I was framing this in camera, I would have come in a little bit tighter on the top, okay? And more space down the bottom, okay? Now, let's come in a little bit on this side too. I don't think we need that. I'm going to add an edge vignette with my presets again. All right, and I'm going to go and adjust this one. Okay, so my presets that are available in our store, if you want to share a link to that, Rob, or directly to the Lightroom presets, it's presets that you can choose in Lightroom to automatically do. I've got reducing noise. This one is a template for a preset for vignette, and you can go and adjust it after the fact as well. Okay, so that's the nature of non-destructive editing. So I'm going to change it to a highlight priority. And what that means is that if I darken the edge a lot, you see how it's darkening the icicle as well? But if I turn up this slider here, okay, it should give me a little bit more light in that icicle. Okay. Let's see what happens when we choose select subject. Let's see what it picks. Again, the program is usually looking for things that are in focus, and here it's done a really good job of selecting it. Okay. So now I'm going to increase the whites, and I don't have the ability of doing the shift double click in here because I'm doing a mask, but I'm going to actually increase the whites so that there is a few of these highlights clipping just because I want to get these a little brighter. And I'm going to increase the highlights. Okay, so see how it's brightening up that ice. Okay. Play a little dance with those. So I want the ice to look a little bit more icy as opposed to dark. Okay, and I'm going to give it more texture and a bit of clarity. So let's just see what that's doing. I can rename it. Yeah, why it's not giving me these eyeballs on here? That's interesting. Okay, so before, after. So we've really just kind of punched it up, given it a lot more contrast. This one might look cool in black and white, actually, but before I do that, I'm going to go into the HSL again, and I'm going to do luminance for brightness, and see if I can't darken this area. Okay. So there's a few different ways. So you know how it's got like orange and brown, orange and red. It's also darkening the tree branch. Okay, so that's actually not a bad thing. I don't mind darkening that. We could darken the greens here at the bottom. Okay. Or I could do another mask and do tonal range or color range. I'm going to try luminance range and just select that area. Okay. And then in this case, I'm going to minus the subject. Okay. So like you were asking about the tree before, I'm going to minus the subject from this selection. Okay. So now I've just got this upper area, and I can affect the highlights and the brightness. I'm actually going to lower this clarity and sharpness because I'm getting a little bit of artifacts up in here. And what happens is when I'm pulling it too far, you start to get these almost banding areas. And by lowering the sharpness, and I can even do clarity and texture down, I keep those minimized. Okay. So if you start to get noise or banding in the area that you're affecting with the mask, try lowering the texture, clarity, and saturation. Nice and punchy. Let's see what happens if we do this one in black and white. Right? I really like this one in black and white because it simplifies everything all down to tones. And when you switch to black and white, you really want to make sure that you've got good contrast. Right? We've got some clipping. You can increase contrast with the contrast slider. You can also do it with a tone curve. I did an entire video on tone curve. So if you could share that one, please, Rob. Okay, so doing, oops. I need to be on the master. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to increase my tone curve. Say when you have more of an S shape like this, so it's called an S curve, you can adjust where you're darkening and lightening. So in the middle, see the histogram is here behind the curve. It's the same histogram. Okay, so up here is highlights. Down here is shadows. Okay, so we can go really dramatic. And in the middle is midtones. Okay. See what that tone curve is, just giving a little bit of punch. So that looks pretty cool. All right. Black and white, yeah, black and white's really cool. And here we could do the color grading. So similar to what I did in Luminar with the it was called toning. Here it's called color grading. It used to be called split tone, but now they've got 3. So you can adjust the shadows. And in this case, let's add some blue, but just really subtle. Okay. Let's just see how much blue. There we go. Okay, so I've just done what's called a blue tone, and that makes it feel cold again, right? So warmer colors, yellow, orange, and red, have been minimized, right? We've gone totally black and white, and now we've gone with a split tone or a blue tone, okay? Curves tutorial for Luminar. It's exactly the same principle, Holly. So you could watch that one because the curve thing works exactly the same. I don't remember if I demonstrated it in Luminar in that particular video, but the curve, how it works is exactly the same. You put points on it like I did here and adjust the tone curve, okay? You can also adjust individual colors, red, green, and blue, okay? And I explained that in the video as well. I hadn't thought about black and white for this one. The reason I thought about black and white, Stephanie, is because it has such high contrast, and I wanted to feature the lighting here and simplify it. Because there was that sort of orange tone in the background, I wanted to minimize the orange tone because warm colors jump out of the image and cool colors recede, right? So the orange was coming out too strong in the background, and just by going black and white really quickly, we minimized that and got rid of it. If you're in Lightroom, what tool are you using, Stephanie? Because we can actually do both versions here. Okay, so I created a quick virtual copy, and I did that by pressing Command or Control apostrophe. You can also right click and choose Create Virtual Copy, and all that does is makes another thumbnail down here in Lightroom. Okay, so you can see there's 2 thumbnails now. And I'm going to go back in the history right before I changed it to black and white. Okay, so there's the color image. And now we have a virtual copy that's black and white. And then we can compare. Okay, so now we've got 2 different versions. So let's take a vote. Okay, who likes the color one? Put in the chat. Or if you're watching this video later, put a comment below. Do you prefer the color version or the black and white version, the black and white toned version? Trish likes the black and white, so go ahead and vote now. Black and white or color? Any other questions about this one while it's on the screen or anything I've done here in terms of conversion? Black and white, black and white. Oh, Holly likes the color, black and white. Okay, so lots of votes for black and white. Seems to be the consensus. Rob, which one do you prefer? Black and white with the blue toning. Right now, if we want the ice to come out as warmer, you can actually add a yellow to the highlights. Okay, so you've got independent control over the tone in the shadows and the highlights. So see, now I've got yellow in the highlights, almost like a sun is coming through it. Okay, so you can really adjust. This is now called a split tone. Okay, so you've got a different tone in the highlights than the shadows, and that brings out the ice even more. Okay. Vicky likes the black and white, so you've got at least a partner, Holly. I like the black and white, but I like them both. I think it's a strong image to begin with, so you can't really go wrong. All right, let's see. I want to get one more in here. I've got one of Rita's. I've got a few of Rita's, but this one she sent in this week, and it looks like snowdrifts. I'm hoping it's snowdrifts because you can see the sparkles here. So I'm going to bring this one. Oops, I'll just get rid of all my menus. There we go. So I'm going to bring this one in. So you notice that you see that it's a monochrome image. Okay, so she's converted it. It's a raw file, CR2 Canon. You can see the exposure information there for AJ if you want the exposure information. Right? But you'll notice when I go in here to black and white, I still have the ability to adjust tones. Okay. Now, if I go back to here, I want to see what it looked like in color. Okay, so she shot a color image and turned it to black and white this way. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the color image and adjust the color image first. You see there's a lot of blue in here, okay? I'm going to adjust that with the eyedropper, okay? So if you've never used the eyedropper, it's this little guy up here next to white balance, and you need to click on something neutral, okay? So watch what happens if I click in this blue area of the snow. Okay, see how it's neutralized it. So now this part of the snow is a little bit yellow even, right? And it's neutralized the color that I clicked on. So it picks up any type of color tint, okay? If I click there, you see now that's neutral, right? Watch what happens if I click on the tree, really blue, okay? So where you click matters, right? So I kind of like it somewhere in the middle here. If I go into the really deep shadows, we get a really warm image, okay? Look at how it's pushed up the temperature to 25,000, right? We can also try auto and see how it does, right? We can try one of the presets. Because she shot raw, we can work on the preset. I kind of like this one that I got first, actually, somewhere in this range. Okay, so it makes this feel like it's warm and sunny over here, not so much there. So let's start with that, right? And then I'm going to do, oops, wrong button. Shift double click, right? One thing I would like to mention, and I went through this, we did this recently, Holly. It was, no, I did this with Regan, one of my other tutoring students. Okay. We went through and did a color calibration of her monitor together. And, oh, I've got crazy COVID hair. We went through and we did a color calibration of the monitor, and I use something like this. Okay. They've upgraded this one. I think trying to link to this one, Rob, because I put it into one of my Amazon lists under the computer items. They've changed this now. It's called the Color Right or something like that, but it's by X-Rite, okay? And this is what's called a color calibration device. So you plug it into your computer and it runs a piece of software to calibrate your monitor, and it analyzes the color just like we did with the white balance just now. Okay, so it runs the a series of color on your screen, and then it analyzes to make the gray tones as neutral as possible, and it also helps you to set your brightness level to neutral as well. Because if your monitor is set too high brightness, you'll be editing your pictures visually too dark, okay? Because you'll think that they look good, but they're actually darker than what you're seeing on your screen, okay? So let me see. Just give me like a virtual hands up in the chat or say yes if you've ever edited your image in your editing software on your computer and then shared it online or Facebook or some other way, or even looked at it on your phone and it looks completely different. It's either too dark, too light, a funky color. Does anybody else have that experience? I'd love to hear from you guys. Because if you have, it's a calibration issue, okay? And you cannot do it. You cannot fix it without a device like that. Okay, you could do a color calibration thing on your screen. Like, for example, I know some Windows machines come with it, or Windows comes with it. Okay, but when I look up under my display settings here, okay, there's a color setting. Right? Oh, and I'm not even on the right one. Okay, so I'm going to choose this one. See, I'm not even using the right color display. Okay, so this one here. Oops, can't see what I'm doing. These are the ones that I've done as the profiles from the calibration device. Okay, so you'll notice that it shifted the color a little bit. Okay? So your color, your display brightness, and the color can be adjusted. And that's the danger of, you'll notice that if I change any of these to previous ones that I've done, they're pretty close, right? Let's see if I have any others. Yeah, laptop. Here we go. So here's some of my older ones. Okay, so these are different calibrations. That was my old laptop. Okay, so see how out to lunch that was, okay, from October 2010, okay, versus the current one. Okay. In print, it was too dark. Now I use a calibrator, but I have yet to make prints, so I need to do that test. Yes. Do you, you've got, yeah, you've had the calibrator, right, Holly? So yeah, do a test and as she's suggesting, order from your print lab some tests after you calibrate. Okay, and most of them will send you a test image that you can print and then match to the one that you see on the screen. So it should be fairly close to what you see on the screen. Okay, but you also have to keep in mind that you can't print the same as what you see here, because print is ink and dyes and so on, and you're looking at an electronic image, and they will never look exactly the same, especially if you have a high definition monitor or a 4K monitor. You'll actually see more images on your monitor than you'll ever get out of a print, just because it's again that high dynamic range thing. If you attended my HDR workshop recently, my webinar, it's about the dynamic range that something is capable of capturing. So your eyes can see more dynamic range than your camera. Your camera can capture more range than your computer can display, for example. Your computer can display more dynamic range or contrast than a print can. Right? So it's about getting the maximum amount of information so that you can print it and have that. But you definitely need to turn off, yes, definitely turn off auto adjusting. Okay, yeah. Let's see if I go back here. I close my little thing here. So yes, if you're on a Mac, you definitely want to turn this off. Why do I have that turned on is a good question. Okay, so you definitely want to have that turned off. Yes, thank you, Holly. Apparently my own settings were out to lunch. Okay, so now that makes more sense. Right, we've got a decent color. I'm going to bring the shadows up a little bit. Now I love the swirls that are happening around this sort of little stump here. And I can kind of see why she put it in the middle, but you want to think about off-centering your subject a little bit more. So decide, I like the shadow going off here, but I also like the texture that's coming up here. So I'm going to keep this aspect ratio, and you can do that by locking it here or just by holding the shift key down. So now you can see that I can just make it bigger, smaller, but it keeps the same proportions, versus if I unlock it, I can change the proportions like I did on the flower. So I'm going to keep the same aspect ratio, and I'm going to crop from the bottom and the left. Okay. The other way I could do it is the opposite. So I've kept all of this stuff up here. I could also do it the opposite way and come in a little bit more here and keep the shadow. Okay. That actually works too. Okay, so now we've got the shadow, which is actually leading us into our little stump here. Okay. Let's do a slight edge vignette. Let's give it a little bit of clarity. Generally, I don't go past, 10 or 20 on the clarity scale, especially if people are in the picture. I will do this here on the subject. So let's see what it selects. Hopefully it picks that tree. Yep. Okay, so I'm going to give the tree a whole bunch more texture and clarity, and we're going to brighten it just a little bit. And I'm going to set a message for Rob. We've got cats wanting lunch, so if you can get on the lunch with the cats. And I think I want to do one more. I want to give it a little bit more sparkle in the snow. So I'm going to select the subject one more time, but then I'm going to invert it because it did a really good job of selecting the subject, but I want the snow this time. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some black. Okay, so look what happens when I add black. Remember, we get more contrast. So even up here, okay, can move this out of the road. So look what happens when I add black. Okay, we can add more texture in the snow as well. And I'm going to bring these highlights down just a little bit. Look at that. Now it still feels blue in the shadows to me, but I'm going to solve that with this HSL, or I'm going to solve it in their color grading. So remember how we just did the blue toned icicle? I'm going to add blue. Sorry, I'm going to opposite. I said there's too much blue. I'm going to add yellow into the shadows a little bit. Okay. And it's not going to be a lot, right? I'm not like that. I just want a little bit just to take off this sort of color tint that I have in the shadows. Somewhere around there. Okay. So just see what that's doing. Can you see the difference? Right? The shadows are blue versus warming them up a little bit. Okay? So shadows are blue in general. Right? Now, if I want the tree to be even warmer, I can add some orange to the midtones. But you see it's affecting the whole image. I want it just on the tree. And the only drawback of color grading and HSL in Lightroom is you don't have the ability of masking it. Okay, you can't mask this tool versus in doing it in Luminar, you can. So actually, let's take this guy over to Luminar and see what we can do to finish it up. Okay. All right. Rob says the cats are poking him in the butt. That is the signal for feed us humans. That's what happens around our house. Okay. Where's my Luminar? Oh, opened over here. Okay. So remember we were talking about the color. I'm not going to use a template this time because then we know what I want to do. I want to affect the color. And I'm going to go down to that toning tool that we use to affect the shadows. Right? I turn the saturation up high just so that I can get the right color, the right hue. So I like that hue right there. So I'm looking at in the snowbank in here, okay? And then I'll just turn it down, okay? Maybe a little bit more yellow, yep. So then I'm just gonna turn it up to the point of eliminating the blue without having orange shadows, okay? Let's see. Okay, so now I wanted to affect the color of the log. Remember, I want to give it a little bit more color, okay? So we can go into the color panel and we can affect the oranges, right? Because I'm guessing there's going to be some orange in that tree stump. Yeah, so we can increase the orange and the yellow. See, it's also picked up on the snow, okay? But if I only want this tree, you see it's got some red. Let's shift the hue so it's a little bit more orangey, like so. You see what that's doing? So it's affecting the snow, but I want to affect just the log. So I'm going to use the radial mask. Oops. So it's something like that. I want to shift my, something like that. Okay. And see, my Adobe was telling me I need to update. So that looks good. Let's try some details, because details is another one that I like in Luminar as opposed to Lightroom. So it's similar to texture and clarity, but look what happens when I do details. So again, slide it all the way up. Look at all this texture in the snow that we're missing out on, okay? So take them all the way to see what they do, okay? Large details versus medium versus small. Okay? Small, I keep low on purpose, but medium details and large, in this case, are doing a really nice job overall, especially on the snow. Right? Right? How's that? Now, in this case, I really like what that's doing, except in the shadows. So I'm just going to erase it from in here. Right? I don't like what it's doing over in here. Okay? So I'm going to keep the shadows a little bit less textured. And a vignette. Okay? Remember in Luminar, we can off-center the vignette. So I really like that feature. So I'll often use the vignette here as opposed to Lightroom. I could just use a radial filter in Lightroom, but I just like this vignette a lot. It's simpler for me. Okay? And the other advantage is I can do an inner light if I want to brighten up that log. Okay? So see where that's darkening our edges a little bit. And I think I'm going to go back and erase again some of these details from the edge of the picture and keep it more on the middle. So basically now I'm sharpening the middle of the picture and the log and not as much over here on the edges. Okay, so we've warmed up the log, brought out some color and detail. And let's do my favorite, which is actually glow might work really well on this one. Let's try actual glow. So see how the snow is now glowing? So we've got a little bit of a sparkle. Actually, that works really well because then it takes away some of that texture up here and leaves the texture down here. Yeah, I like that. And my mouse batteries again. We can wait. Okay, before it was really blue as it came out of Lightroom, but remember we couldn't mask that tool. Okay, so now I've corrected some of those color issues. Okay, another great way to fix color issues, now I've masked this one in here, is this remove color cast. Okay, it does a really good job of sort of picking out anything that is a bizarre color in your image and just removing it. So use that slider as well. No, she did not change the batteries before she left. She just wanted food. Cats. We joke around here that the standing joke with anybody that has cats is that dogs have owners and cats have staff. It really does do a nice finish, and I use it for a lot of things. Now, could I do that in Lightroom? Probably with a little bit of finagling, but more likely going to Photoshop. Okay, and those are some of the things that I'll be talking about in the Photoshop workshop as to when to go to Photoshop, what things can and can't you do in Photoshop versus Lightroom. Okay, and I just thought of something else that I want to do to Holly's image. So we're going to go back here because I'm going to go back to I'm going to start with the one that we already edited, and I'm going to open this one again in Luminar. Actually, we could even do it in Photoshop. Let's do this one in Photoshop. Okay, so we're going to edit in a Photoshop as a smart object. Okay, and what I'm going to show you is Holly has some of these, so you could try these out. Is a bokeh template. Okay, because that background was a thing that was bothering me here, because it just seems sort of gray and nondescript. Okay, so here's my image in Photoshop. Let me just change my screen here. So I use two monitors. I have my laptop, and then I have all my tools on a secondary monitor. Okay, so when I'm working, my tools are on my other screen, and my image is on this screen. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I am going to add a layer. And the simplest way for me to do that is I just have to find them first, is by using, and I have to find all the images. There we go. Okay. Using Adobe Bridge. Okay. So this is something that comes with Photoshop and Lightroom, right? You get Bridge as part of the package when you have the package that you're paying monthly. And Bridge is like your browser for Photoshop, okay? Because Photoshop, you're opening one image at a time. Okay, so Bridge is your photo browser. Okay, let me just fit it onto the screen here. Okay, so this is what Bridge looks like. Okay, and I'm going to make it smaller on purpose because I'm literally going to pick one of these and drag it over to this image. Okay, so let's take a look at this image. It's got like oranges and pinks. Let's see. Oops. Now here's a little shortcut. If you're using Bridge, just hit the space bar and it will give you a preview of your image larger on your screen. So that one might work with the flowers or this one. So I kind of like those tones. Or if we want something more orange and yellow, we could go down and try something like that. Let's see. I think I like the pink tones of this first one. So I'm going to go ahead and add this one. Okay. And how I do that from Bridge here is I'm literally just going to grab this thumbnail, see me moving it, and take it over to to Photoshop and drop it. Okay, and what happens is it adds it as a layer, and it's in the transform tool. And all I have to do is just make it fit. Okay, so it's fitting the image. And when I hit enter, okay, it's now over top. And you can see that it's got this little thing in the corner here. That means it's a smart object. Okay, so I can actually change this image by double clicking. Okay, now you'll see that it's open. It looks the same, but it's not. Okay, so it shows me the background. I'm going to show you a quick little trick here. So let's say I decide I want this one instead. Okay, I just drop this one on top, resize it again. Okay, and I just have to flatten this and save this one. Okay, so I'm going to save it. And then when I close it and I come back to the image I was working on, okay, now you can see that it's changed the top image. Okay, so that's what a smart image, a smart object does. I'm going to talk more about that when we do the Photoshop workshop, and probably in the version 3.1, because that's a little bit more of an advanced idea. Okay, so what I want to do now is, we can't see the bottom image, right? So I want to put this bokeh in the background and decide where I'm going to place it. So I can do a couple of things. I can lower the opacity of it. Okay, so you can see then the bottom image shows through. Okay, and that might be helpful for getting the placement. Okay, so I can flip this image. Okay, so I can free transform it. I can rotate it. Oh, come on. Okay, so I can rotate it like so. I can flip it. So I don't mind that, but I kind of like these guys on the top edge there. So I'm going to go flip, vertical, and now I've got a couple of the bokehs up on this top edge. Okay, we can also do free transform, which is Command T. Right, I can stretch it. Okay, I can move it around, make it bigger. Okay, and so on. But the next thing I want to do, as opposed to lowering the opacity, I'm going to change the blend mode. Okay, so the things that are behind the flower in the background here, when you change the blend mode, again, I'm going to be covering this in the Photoshop workshop. You change the blend mode, it's how this layer is affecting and interacting with the one below it. So anything in the darken mode, wherever this image that I've put on top is darker than the one in the bottom, okay, that's where it's going to show up. So that's kind of weird. Okay, so anything in this section is going to darken the image. Anything in this section is going to lighten. Okay, so often for overlays like this, I'll use screen or lighten. Okay, overlay works fairly well for some kind of overlays, textures especially. But in this case, I think this screen works the best. Okay, so we're going to go with screen, and then we need to mask it because I don't want these all over the flowers. I just want it in that top part. Okay, so I'm going to add a mask, and the tool that I'm going to use to mask it is this gradient, actually. So black to white, and oops, when I paint on here, I'm going to go from the top to the bottom. And see how it painted the mask in for me. So anything that's black on the mask is now not showing. Okay, so I've gotten almost everything except this little guy here. And I'm just going to paint. Make sure you have black and white. Okay, I'm using a lot of keyboard shortcuts. Rob, if you could please share the link to the Photoshop and Lightroom keyboard shortcuts. Actually, we've got the Luminar one. Any of that you have out yet, you could get our keyboard shortcuts downloaded. So I'm going to paint this one out at 50%. I'm just going to lower it. Let's just see. So I want it to appear like it's behind the flower. Okay, see that? I want to just mask it off the flower. And then maybe I want it stronger. So it looks like it's coming out from behind the flower. See that? So that's adding just a little bit of something different in that background, right? Now, if I want it darker, because it's lightened the whole image and I liked it darker, we can do what's called an adjustment layer. I'm going to just darken it with a little bit of levels. Now you'll see that it's darkening the whole image, but I'm going to fix it. I'm going to do what's called a clipping layer. Okay, so I'm holding Alt Option. I'm going really fast here, I know. And I'm going to make sure that this adjustment only applies to the one below it. Okay, so you see that? It's only applying to the actual bokeh layer. Okay, so now when I adjust these levels, you see how it's only applying there. Okay. Like so. So that's kind of cool. I like what that's happening there. It kind of gives us a nice little edge, something interesting more than the background that was there. Okay, now because I opened this from Lightroom, okay, again, all I want to do is hit save. So Command S, and all of these layers here are going to get saved as a Photoshop document or PSD. And when I close it, Command W, it's going to take me back to Lightroom as soon as the image is saved. It's probably saving in the background. Right? So I know you've got some bokehs, Holly, and I know you know how to apply them. So I would try a bokeh on this one. So now let's see our 3 versions. Look at that. Okay, so original Lightroom one, top left, Luminar Edit, top right, Photoshop Edit, bottom. But you can do that with Luminar as well. Yes, and you could add a texture on that one. I think this is a really cool image to play with. Neo will have layers eventually. It does not have layers right now in the version that I have. So you can't currently add a bokeh or a texture, but they are saying that they will have layers when it ships. Yep. Perfect. Thanks, AJ. You like that edit? Yes, it does. Yep. Does that mean your brain is on fire, AJ? So that could be a cue that we need to wrap it up for today. I'm just going to come back over here and remind you to submit your photos. I'm going to stay on the small. I got COVID hair today. So remind you to submit your photos using that link. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. If you are watching on Facebook, please come to the YouTube channel, Digital Photo Mentor Live. It's youtube.com/Digital Photo Mentor/live. If you could put a link in the chat, please, Rob, and the Facebook people watching will get that. If you subscribe to us on YouTube and hit the notification, that little bell, it will give you a notice as to when we are live. And you can also set a reminder, so it will tell you, it'll ping on your phone or whatever you're using to remind you of when we're going live. I also had some questions about knowing the conversion of the time zones. Okay, so if you're not sure when we're going live, just go to that link, okay, on YouTube. Rob, if you could please share that one. Go to that link and it will always tell you how many days and how many hours left until we go live, and it will show you the time in your time zone, okay, because it knows what time zone your computer is set for. All right. Mind blown. Thanks, AJ. I thought that's what that little thing meant. Okay. Let's see. Vivian, if you didn't want to use a bokeh background, could you add a layer with a different color for the background? Yeah, actually you could, and it would be even simpler than that. I could literally just select the background in Photoshop and shift it, do a color overlay and shift it. So I wouldn't even need to do another layer. I could just do a color overlay. Yep. And wants a link to our travel tripods. I think there is a link for our our Amazon store, our Amazon affiliate, or expert, what am I called? Amazon influencer store with some tripods. If you could share those for Anne, please, especially a travel one. And that's where to find us on YouTube. He's looking, Anne. Some great learning. What did everybody pick up today? I'd love to actually hear one or two things. AJ says his mind is blown, but is there one particular thing that caused your cerebrum to explode, AJ? Thanks for coming as always, Stephanie. We're going to try changing these things up coming up, just to do some different things. I'm going to be having some guests maybe coming up, where we do edit each other's images. So a little bit different. I did that with another fellow who has a YouTube channel, and it seemed quite popular, and other people were asking for me to do more of that. So I've got a few people that I may have on as a guest, and we're going to swap images and then edit each other's photos and see how that goes. Okay. Edit for the subject. Thanks, Holly. I forget sometimes myself, so good reminder. And thank you for noticing that my auto adjust was on my monitor settings. Remember to think about black and white. Yep. And here's the thing, everybody. If you are shift to black and white, yep. If you are forgetting these things, make yourself a little index card or something and put it behind your computer where you normally sit to edit, and just say, hey, remember black and white. Hey, remember I'm editing for the subject, and so on. So give yourself like a little poster of reminders of what you want to think about when you're doing that. Spare batteries on hand. Well, I use rechargeables and they're plugged in over there. So I could have taken a 2-minute break, but yes, always have spare batteries on hand for everything. Always have lots of batteries charged. And on that note, charge your batteries this week. And I'm going to sign out. Rob's going to continue to find some links for you, and then ask for a tripod. If we can't find it, we'll put it in the description of the video after the fact. So thanks for signing up. Thanks for coming. Always, all of you that come week after week. It's great to virtually see you. And thanks for all your comments and questions. So recharge your batteries this week. There's a new article on the website about getting inspired and working with your composition. So check that out. Check your email box if you're an email subscriber, because that should be sitting in your inbox. And we'll see you next week. Take care.